I'm Maya, 28 female. I live in a small, quiet apartment filled with books and historical maps, a stark contrast to the sprawling, pristinely manicured house I grew up in. By profession, I'm an archivist, a keeper of facts and tangible histories, someone who believes in the power of primary sources. For my entire life, I have been the other daughter, the quiet, serious one who existed in the brilliant, blinding shadow of my younger sister, Serafina. My family believed her to be a self-made prodigy, a wellness guru who built an empire from scratch. But I discovered it was all a house of cards, funded by a devastating secret. I revealed that secret at a family dinner, and in the space of a single dessert course, I burned my family to the ground. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Chapter 1: The Golden Child. To understand what I did, you have to understand my family. Our home was less a place of comfort and more a stage, meticulously set dressed by my mother, Diana. A former local news anchor, Mom's life was a masterclass in optics. Every curtain was perfectly pleated, every family photo angled to capture our best sides, and every story she told about her children was polished to a high-gloss sheen. My father, Arthur, a financial advisor, was the silent partner in this production. He was a man who understood numbers but seemed incapable of reading the emotional ledger of his own household. He loved us, I think, but his love was passive, a quiet endorsement of my mother's script. And in that script, my sister, Serafina, was the star. From the time we were children, Sira had a kind of glow about her. She was beautiful, effervescent, and possessed an uncanny ability to reflect back at people the version of herself they most wanted to see. While I was the nerdy kid with my nose in a history book, fascinated by the dead and forgotten, Sira was building a following. It started small, in school. She was the girl everyone wanted to be friends with, the one who set the trends. If Sira wore a certain type of ribbon in her hair, the next day, a dozen other girls would be wearing the same. I'd watch from the periphery, an amateur anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. My role was simple: to be the reliable, smart, and ultimately forgettable older sister. The built-in, on-demand tutor. The one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries. The stable, gray backdrop against which Sira's vibrant colors could pop. Our family dinners were the primary showcase for this dynamic. They were weekly, non-negotiable events held at my parents' home. Each one felt like a press conference for the Serafina show. "Sira, darling, tell your father about the charity gala," my mother would prompt, her eyes gleaming. And Sira would launch into a story, gesturing with hands that were always perfectly manicured. She wouldn't just say she attended. She would describe the way the CEO of some major corporation sought her out, desperate for her insights on millennial marketing. She spoke of her brand, Aura Wellness, as if it were a global entity, not just a slickly designed Instagram page and a website that sold overpriced jade rollers. He said, "Serafina, you just have your finger on the pulse of the culture," she'd say, with a little laugh that was both humble and self-congratulatory. My father would beam, lifting his wine glass. "That's my girl, a real go-getter, built it all herself." Meanwhile, my contributions were met with polite, but vacant, smiles. "I'm working on cataloging a collection of 19th century maritime letters," I'd say, genuinely excited by the prospect. My mother would pat my hand. "That's nice, dear, so meticulous." It wasn't a compliment, it was a classification. I was the family librarian, dependable, dusty, and silent. She would then immediately pivot back to her star. "Sira, you look a little thin. Are you remembering to eat? Running an empire must be exhausting." The empire? Aura Wellness. According to Serafina's social media and the stories she spun, it was a multifaceted lifestyle brand. She was a consultant, a life coach, and influencer. Her Instagram feed was a curated fantasy of five-star resorts, bespoke business suits, and inspirational quotes superimposed on sunsets. She posted about closing deals in Dubai, sourcing materials in Bali, and attending mastermind summits in Switzerland. To our family and to her thousands of followers, she was the epitome of modern success. Young, beautiful, and self-made. My role in this was to be the believer-in-chief. When distant relatives would ask about her, my mother would nudge me. Maya, tell them about Sierra's latest venture. And I would dutifully recite the talking points, feeling like a fraud. I was her tech support, too. I helped her set up her first web site, explaining the difference between a domain name and hosting. I'd get late-night calls. Maya, my laptop is doing that weird thing again. Can you fix it? I have a huge presentation for investors tomorrow. I'd walk her through a simple reboot, and she'd hang up with a breezy, "You're a lifesaver," before I could even ask who these mysterious investors were. I lived in a world of verifiable facts, of cross-referenced sources and carbon-dated artifacts. My work at the city archive was a sanctuary of truth. When I held a 200-year-old letter in my hands, its ink faded but its message clear, I felt grounded. The paper was real. The ink was real. The story it told had happened. At home, I felt like I was floating in a sea of embellished half-truths and outright fabrications. The dissonance was becoming a low, constant hum in the back of my mind. My Aunt Genevieve, my mother's older sister and a history professor at the local university, was the only one who seemed to see me. She'd come to the obligatory family dinners, watch the Serafina show with a quiet, analytical gaze, and then find me in the kitchen afterward. "Don't let them dull your shine, kiddo," she told me once while we were washing dishes. "Your work matters, history matters, truth matters." "She seems to be doing so well," I'd say, almost trying to convince myself. I should be happy for her. Genevieve would just dry a plate with slow, deliberate movements. "There's a difference between being happy for someone's success," she said, her eyes meeting mine in the reflection of the window, "and being happy for the story they're telling about their success." Her words stayed with me. They were one of the first, solid things I could hold onto in the swirling fog of my family's narrative. The golden child was dazzling, and her light was so bright that it made it impossible for anyone to see what, or who, was being consumed to keep it burning. I didn't know it then, but the fuel was running out, and the first signs of the collapse were about to appear. Chapter 2, The First Lie. The lie that started the avalanche wasn't small. It was audacious, a masterstroke of fiction that was perfectly in character for Serafina. It arrived, as most family news did, at the Sunday dinner table. This was about 8 months before the final confrontation. Sierra was practically vibrating with excitement. She had arrived late, sweeping into the dining room in a cream-colored silk suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She kissed my father's cheek and accepted a glass of champagne from my mother as if she were a visiting royal. "Sorry I'm late, everyone," she announced, though no one had minded. Her lateness only enhanced her mystique. "I was on a call with my new PR team. Things are just getting so wonderfully hectic." My mother clasped her hands together in delight. "PR team? Oh, Serafina, that's a major step. Tell us everything." Sierra took a dramatic sip of her champagne. "Well, it's all still under wraps, so this cannot leave this room." She looked around the table, making eye contact with each of us, a practiced move to create intimacy and importance. "You know how I've been working on the Aura Wellness Foundation, arm of the company?" We all nodded. The foundation was a new development she'd been posting about for a month. It was vague, full of buzzwords like empowerment, sustainability, and community building, but had no actual projects listed on the website. "Well," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "we just secured our first round of seed funding, a major philanthropic grant." My father sat up straighter. As a financial advisor, this was language he understood. "A grant? From who? That's fantastic, honey." Sierra smiled, a slow, dazzling thing. "The Atherton Foundation." The name hung in the air. Even I knew that name. The Atherton Foundation was one of the oldest, most respected philanthropic organizations in the country. They funded medical research, university arts programs, and major international aid projects. They were notoriously selective, the Mount Everest of grants. For them to fund a fledgling, unproven lifestyle brand's foundation was, well, it was unbelievable. My goodness, my mother breathed, her hand flying to her chest. Serafina, the Athertons, that's incredible. How much? $250,000, Sierra said, delivering the line with the perfect blend of pride and nonchalance. The room erupted. My father let out a whoop, getting up to hug her. My mother started crying, dabbing her eyes with her napkin. I always knew it, she sobbed happily. I always knew you were destined for great things. I sat there, a piece of roast chicken halfway to my mouth, frozen, $250,000. It was a staggering sum. It was life-changing. And a cold, hard knot of disbelief formed in my stomach. As an archivist, I had a passing familiarity with grant application processes. I'd helped a colleague apply for a historical preservation grant once. It was a mountain of paperwork, requiring years of financial records, verifiable project outlines, and letters of support from established institutions. Serafina's foundation had a 3-page website and no history. It didn't make sense. Wow, Sierra, I managed to say, forcing a smile. That's amazing. Congratulations, I didn't know you'd even applied. Oh, it was all very hush-hush, she said, waving a dismissive hand. They actually approached me. One of their junior board members follows my brand and recommended me. It was a whirlwind. A few video calls and a presentation, and they were sold on my vision. They approached her. It was the detail that snagged me. Foundations like Atherton didn't scout Instagram influencers. They had a rigorous, multi-stage application process that was publicly available on their website. The story was just a little too perfect, a little too much like a movie plot. My mother, now recovered, was already on her phone. I have to call Genevieve. She will not believe this. No, Mom, please, Sierra said, suddenly sharp. I told you it's under wraps. The official press release isn't for another 2 weeks. If this leaks, it could jeopardize the whole thing. Please, just for us for now. My mother looked disappointed but nodded. Of course, darling, your father and I know how to be discreet. The lie was brilliant in its construction. The huge, impressive number, the prestigious, unimpeachable name, and the built-in excuse to prevent anyone from verifying it, the classic, it's a secret confidentiality clause. It was an airtight bubble of deceit. Anyone who questioned it wasn't just doubting her, they were risking this incredible, life-changing opportunity for her. They would be a bad guy. For the rest of the dinner, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching the scene from behind a glass wall. I watched my sister weave a tapestry of future plans fueled by this phantom money. She spoke of opening a wellness center, hiring staff, and launching a podcast with celebrity guests. I watched my parents hang on her every word, their faces glowing with a pride so profound it was almost painful to witness. They so desperately wanted it to be true. Their daughter wasn't just a success, she was a phenomenon. Her success was their success, the ultimate validation of their parenting, of their lives. I went home that night with a sick feeling in my gut. I tried to dismiss it as jealousy. It was a familiar accusation, one my mother had leveled at me subtly for years whenever I failed to match her enthusiasm for Serafina. You're just jealous. Maybe I was. Maybe I, the quiet archivist who made a modest salary and found joy in dusty papers, was envious of my sister's glamorous, seemingly effortless ascent. But it wasn't jealousy. It was the feeling an archivist gets when a document's date doesn't match the historical context or when a signature looks just a little too clean. It was the feeling of a forgery. My sister hadn't just told a fib, she had presented a forged document to the people who trusted her most. This wasn't just a lie to make herself look good. $250,000 was more than just a story. It was a motive, a lie that big had to be covering up something else. It was the first thread I pulled, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that if I kept pulling, a whole lot more was going to unravel. Chapter 3, A Thread of Doubt. The 2 weeks of secrecy Serafina had mandated passed in a haze of forced enthusiasm. My mother would call me daily, whispering excitedly about the future. "Your sister is looking at office spaces downtown," she'd say. "Real ones, not just that little co-working space. Can you imagine? Aura Wellness on the directory." My father started dropping hints to his golf buddies, unable to fully contain his pride. And I played along, offering non-committal responses while a storm of suspicion brewed inside me. I told myself to let it go. What would be the point of questioning it? It would cause a massive fight, I would be branded as bitter and jealous, and our already strained family dynamic would shatter completely. If she was lying, what was the harm? It was just a story to make our parents proud. But the archivist in me, the part of my brain trained to seek out primary sources and verifiable truths, wouldn't stay quiet. The lie was a splinter in my mind, and I couldn't stop worrying at it. The day of the supposed official announcement came and went with deafening silence. There was no press release from the Atherton Foundation. Their website featured a story on a new pediatric wing they'd funded in Chicago. There was no mention of Aura Wellness or Serafina. I waited for the phone call from my mother, the confused or angry one. It never came. When I saw her for our weekly coffee the following Saturday, I braced myself. "So no news about the grant?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I stirred my latte. My mother waved her hand dismissively, a gesture I was coming to loathe. "Oh, it's all been delayed. Some legal holdup. You know how these big organizations are, so much red tape. Sierra said her new lawyers are handling it. It's actually a good thing. It gives her more time to strategize the rollout." The excuse was so flimsy, so convenient. It was another layer of paint on a cracking wall. The lawyers, the red tape. Any doubt could be deflected by invoking these faceless, bureaucratic forces. It was then that I realized my parents were not passive victims of this lie, they were active participants. They didn't want to know the truth. They were building the fantasy right alongside her. If I was going to find any proof, I was on my own. The first thread, the one that I could actually hold and examine, came from an unlikely source: my father's junk mail. I had gone over to my parents' house to drop off a book for my dad. He wasn't home, but my mom was there, getting ready for a charity luncheon. I was in his home office, a room that always smelled of old paper and leather, placing the book on his desk. His mail was piled in a neat stack, but one envelope had fallen to the floor. It was from a bank I did recognize, Pinnacle Credit Union, and it was addressed to both my father and Serafina. A joint account? That was odd. My father managed all of their finances with one of the big national banks. I knew for a fact Serafina banked with a trendy online-only institution because she'd once spent 20 minutes explaining how it was disrupting the traditional financial paradigm. Curiosity got the better of me. It felt like a betrayal, a violation of privacy, but the feeling that I was being lied to on a massive scale was stronger. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. The envelope wasn't sealed properly, and the flap opened with a gentle tug. Inside was a single-page statement. It was a loan statement, a home equity line of credit, or HELOC. My blood went cold. The account had been opened 3 months prior. The borrower names were listed as Arthur and Serafina. The total line of credit was for $250,000, and it had been almost entirely drawn down. There were a series of large cash transfers made over the course of 2 months to an account I recognized as belonging to my sister's brand, Aura Wellness, LLC. There it was, not a grant from a prestigious foundation, but a loan. A loan taken out against the value of my parents' home, the home I grew up in. My father, a financial advisor who preached fiscal responsibility, had co-signed a massive loan for his 25-year-old daughter's unproven business, and Serafina had dressed it up as a philanthropic grant to make herself look like a genius. I sank into my father's leather desk chair, the paper shaking in my hand. This wasn't just a lie about success anymore. This was a secret, a huge financial risk my parents had taken, and it was being hidden from me. Why? Why the elaborate deception? Why couldn't they just say they were investing in her business? The answer was as obvious as it was ugly. Because my parents gave me a loan didn't sound as good as I was headhunted by a world-renowned foundation. The first story was one of privilege and nepotism. The second was a story of merit and genius. Serafina hadn't just lied to look good, she had done it to maintain the myth of the golden child, the self-made prodigy. And the part that truly sickened me was my father's complicity. He wasn't just a passive audience member, he was the show's primary financial backer. He had put his financial security on the line, had leveraged his own home, and was actively participating in the lie that it was someone else's money. He was letting his youngest daughter present this massive debt as a personal triumph. I carefully folded the statement and slipped it back into the envelope, my mind racing. I pushed the flap down, trying to make it look untouched. I felt dirty, like I had trespassed, but I also felt a strange, cold clarity. The fog of doubt had burned away, replaced by the harsh light of facts. This was real. This was verifiable. This was a primary source. I left the house in a daze, the image of that bank statement seared into my brain. The thread of doubt was no longer a thread. It was a thick, heavy rope, and I knew exactly where it led. It led from the bank to my parents' house and straight into the heart of Serafina's glittering, fraudulent empire. And I knew, with the certainty of a historian discovering a hidden truth, that I was going to follow it all the way to the end. Chapter 4: Unraveling the Tapestry. The loan statement was the Rosetta Stone I needed to decipher the fiction of Serafina's life. With a single, verifiable fact in hand, my entire perspective shifted. I was no longer a suspicious sister, I was an investigator. My quiet, meticulous skills as an archivist, once a source of family mockery, were now my greatest weapon. An archivist's job is to collect, organize, and analyze information to build a coherent, evidence-based narrative. I decided to do the same for Aura Wellness. My first call was to Aunt Genevieve. I met her at her university office, a wonderfully cluttered space that smelled of old books and brewing tea. It was a sanctuary of intellectual honesty. I laid out the story, my voice low and steady, and placed a picture of the loan statement I'd taken on my phone on her desk. She looked at the image, then looked at me, her expression unreadable. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just pushed her glasses up her nose and said, "So? The family genius is funded by the family home. What's your hypothesis?" It was the perfect question. She wasn't asking how I felt, she was asking for my thesis. "My hypothesis," I said, feeling a surge of confidence, "is that Aura Wellness is generating little to no income. I believe Serafina is using the loan money to create the illusion of a successful business. She's funding the trips, the clothes, the whole lifestyle with my parents' money, and I suspect she's burning through it at an alarming rate." And the Atherton grant lie. It's the cover story, I explained. It explains the sudden influx of cash and makes her look like a visionary instead of a beneficiary of parental largesse. It also provides a convenient excuse to demand secrecy, preventing anyone from looking too closely. Genevieve nodded slowly, her fingers steepled under her chin. It's a sound theory, but a theory needs evidence to become fact. A single bank statement is a powerful starting point, but it's not the whole story. If you're going to do this, Maya, you need to be thorough. You need to build an airtight case. No speculation, just documents, just proof. She was right. A confrontation based on one piece of paper could be explained away. My father would claim it was a bridging loan. My mother would accuse me of snooping and creating drama. Serafina would call me a jealous saboteur. I needed more. I needed a complete financial and factual portrait of the fraud. My investigation began online, in the digital archives where Serafina had built her kingdom. I became a forensic follower of her life. I saved every Instagram post, every story, every tweet. Then I started cross-referencing. She'd post a photo of herself at a business lunch at a Michelin star restaurant in Paris. The geotag confirmed the location. The photo showed a lavish meal. A few days later, a charge for that exact amount, converted from euros, would appear on a new statement from the Pinnacle Credit Union that I found in the recycling bin at my parents' house when I went over to fix my dad's Wi-Fi. I had started making excuses to go over there, just to get access to the paper trail. I created a spreadsheet. Column A, Serafina's claim. Column B, date. Column C, location. Column D, the evidence. Claim, sourcing sustainable fabrics in Bali for my new yoga wear line. Evidence, a charge of $7,000 on the HELOC for a business class flight and a week-long stay at a 5-star villa. I cross-referenced this with flight data. There was no corresponding import-export data for Aura Wellness LLC. There was no yoga wear line. It was just a vacation, paid for by the house. Claim, keynote speaking at a Women in Tech conference in Berlin. Evidence, I found the conference website. She wasn't a keynote speaker. She wasn't even a panelist. She had simply purchased a general admission ticket. A ticket that cost $1,500, charged to the loan. The photo she posted was of her standing on the stage after the event had concluded for the day, in an empty auditorium, with a caption that implied she had just addressed a massive crowd. The tapestry of her success was woven from thousands of these tiny, expensive threads of deceit. Each trip, each designer suit, each catered team meeting with the 2 unpaid interns she'd hired was funded by the ticking time bomb of my parents' debt. The more I dug, the angrier I became. This wasn't just vanity, it was a profound betrayal of our parents' trust. They thought they were funding a dream. They were funding a fantasy. The most damning evidence came when I decided to look into the business itself. Aura Wellness was registered as a limited liability company, or LLC. That information is public. For a small fee, I accessed the state's business registry online. I found her initial filing documents. The company was real. But then I looked for annual reports, tax filings, anything that would indicate financial health. There was nothing. LLCs in our state were required to file a simple annual report. Serafina hadn't filed one in 2 years. Her company was listed as not in good standing, one step away from being administratively dissolved by the state. Her empire was a ghost, a shell company with a fancy website, a delinquent status, and a bank account being fed directly from my parents' home equity. The final piece of the puzzle, the deep, dark family secret that the title of this story alludes to, was something I stumbled upon by accident. My father had asked me to help him find some old tax documents for a review he was undergoing. It meant I had legitimate access to his filing cabinet. As I was sorting through folders, one slipped from my grasp, spilling papers across the floor. As I gathered them, I saw it. A folder labeled Diana Medical. I knew I shouldn't look. It was the ultimate violation. But given everything else I had discovered, I felt a strange, grim justification. My family was built on secrets. Maybe this was the one that held it all together. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were not recent documents, but old ones from nearly 20 years ago. It was a series of bills and letters from a psychiatric treatment facility. My mother, Diana, whose entire identity was built on flawless composure and social grace, had suffered a severe nervous breakdown shortly after I was born. A breakdown so severe she had been institutionalized for almost 6 months. It all clicked into place. My mother's obsession with appearances, her desperate need for a perfect, successful daughter, wasn't just vanity. It was a defense mechanism. Serafina's success was the armor she wore against the memory of her own collapse. Her daughter's perfection was proof that she hadn't failed, that her life wasn't fragile, that the darkness couldn't touch her again. And my father, Arthur, had gone along with it all, enabling the fantasy to protect his wife. And Serafina, she had learned the family lesson perfectly. She knew that the story was more important than the truth. She knew that as long as she looked successful, as long as she projected an image of flawless achievement, she would be showered with love and approval. She wasn't just deceiving my parents, she was giving them exactly what they needed. A golden child to worship, so they wouldn't have to look at the cracks in their own foundations. This was the secret. Not just the loan, but the why. The desperate, terrified reason that my entire family was conspiring to believe in a lie. They weren't just funding a business, they were funding my mother's mental stability. I put the folder back, my heart pounding with a toxic mix of pity and rage. I pitied my mother for her past trauma, but I was furious that it was being used as a silent justification to cripple the family's finances and to elevate my sister based on a complete fabrication. My existence as the quiet, grounded, truthful daughter was a threat to their fantasy world. My reality was a reminder of the things they didn't want to face. I now had a complete, evidence-based narrative. I had the loan statement, the travel records, the company's delinquent status, and the psychological motive. The tapestry was fully unraveled, and all its ugly, tangled threads were in my hands. All that was left was to decide when and how to show it to them. Chapter 5: The Family Dinner. For a week, I lived with the evidence stored in a password-protected folder on my laptop, a toxic bomb of truth waiting to be detonated. The weight of it was immense. Every time my phone rang and I saw my mother's name, my stomach would clench. Every cheerful, oblivious text from my father felt like a small twist of a knife. They were all sleepwalking toward a financial cliff, holding hands and humming a happy tune, and I was the only one who was awake. I considered my options. I could talk to my father privately, show him the spreadsheet, and appeal to his professional sensibilities as a financial advisor. But I knew how that would play out. He would retreat into a shell of denial, his loyalty to protecting my mother overriding all logic. He would warn Serafina, and the evidence would be explained away, hidden, or destroyed. I could confront Serafina directly, but she was a master manipulator. She would gaslight me, twist my words, and paint me as a deranged, jealous sister who had illegally snooped through private documents. She would run to our parents, crying, and I would be the villain before I even had a chance to present the facts. No, a private confrontation wouldn't work. The lie was public, performed for an audience. The truth, therefore, needed the same. The deceit was a family affair, a group delusion. It had to be dismantled in front of everyone, leaving no room for whispered excuses or secret damage control later on. The only stage that made sense was the one they had built themselves, the Sunday family dinner. My mother called on a Tuesday to announce the next one. "Darling," she chirped, "this Sunday is a special one. Serafina has some wonderful news to share, and we're celebrating. Please don't be late." More news, another chapter in the fantasy novel of her life. The thought of sitting through another performance, of smiling and nodding while they dug themselves deeper into this financial grave, was unbearable. This would be the time. My plan was simple and in its own way archival. I wasn't going to scream or yell. I was going to present my findings. For the rest of the week, I prepared my case. I printed everything: the initial loan statement, the subsequent statements showing the cash withdrawals, the flight and hotel receipts that matched the dates of Serafina's business trips, screenshots of her Instagram posts with dates and captions highlighted, a printout of her company's delinquent status from the state business registry. I compiled it all into 4 neat folders: one for my father, one for my mother, one for Serafina, and one for Aunt Genevieve, who I called and asked to be there, telling her only that I needed her support. She agreed without hesitation. Each folder was a meticulous, undeniable indictment. I even created a summary page, a cover sheet with bullet points like a formal report. Source of seed funding: $250,000 home equity line of credit co-signed by Arthur. Current balance on HELOC, $238,000. Documented Aura Wellness revenue, $0. Legal status of Aura Wellness LLC, not in good standing. Preparing the folders was a cold, methodical process. I felt detached, like I was simply processing a collection. This is what I do, I told myself. I organize facts, I present history. This is just a more recent, more personal archive. But as I slid the last paper into place, a wave of nausea rolled over me. This wasn't a historical collection. These were people. This was my family. And I was about to systematically destroy them. Was this justice, or was it just cruelty? The night before the dinner, I almost backed out. I sat in my quiet apartment, staring at the stack of folders on my coffee table. Maybe I could just let it go. Let them have their fantasy. What harm was it really doing? But then I thought of my father, in his late 50s, his retirement likely decimated by this. I thought of my mother, whose mental health was being propped up by a structure so fragile it was bound to collapse anyway, and the fallout then would be 1,000 times worse. This wasn't a kindness. It was a time bomb. My intervention wasn't just about exposing a lie, it was about trying to defuse the bomb before it took everyone out. On Sunday, I drove to my parents' house. I dressed carefully, in a simple, professional-looking dark blue dress. I wanted to look serious, credible, not hysterical. I carried the folders in a leather tote bag. Walking into that house felt like stepping onto a stage for the final act of a tragedy. The air was thick with the smell of roasting lamb and my mother's expensive perfume. My father was laughing in the living room, pouring my sister a glass of wine. Serafina was glowing, dressed in a vibrant red dress, the center of all energy in the room. "Maya, you're on time for once," my mother called from the kitchen, a loving dig that set my teeth on edge. Aunt Genevieve was already there, sitting quietly in an armchair, a calming, steady presence. She met my eyes and gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was all the encouragement I needed. We sat down to dinner. The conversation was all sparkle and fluff. Serafina's wonderful news was that she had apparently been headhunted by a publisher for a book deal based on her aura wellness philosophy. It was another perfect lie, another unverifiable claim to be revealed at some point in the distant future. "A book, oh Sira," my mother gushed. "My daughter the author." My father toasted her, his eyes shining with pride. "There's nothing you can't do, sweetheart." I ate my lamb, my heart hammering against my ribs. I waited. I let them have their moment. I let them build the fantasy up as high as it could go. I waited until my mother brought out the dessert, a beautiful, elaborate chocolate cake, and everyone had a slice. The scene had to be perfect, the happy family, celebrating the success of the golden child. Then, when there was a lull in the conversation, I cleared my throat. "Actually," I said, my voice calmer than I expected, "before we finish, I have something I'd like to share as well. It's about Serafina's business. I put together a little portfolio of her accomplishments." My mother beamed. "Oh, Maya, that's so thoughtful. What a wonderful idea." Serafina gave me a suspicious, tight-lipped smile. "A portfolio? What are you talking about?" I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the 4 folders. I slid one across the polished wood of the dining table to my mother, one to my father, one to Serafina, and one to Aunt Genevieve. "I've been doing some archiving," I said simply. "I just wanted to make sure we all had our facts straight." The air in the room shifted. The festive mood evaporated, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. My father stared at the plain manila folder as if it were a venomous snake. My mother looked confused. Only Serafina seemed to understand immediately what was happening. The color drained from her face. "What is this, Maya?" my father asked, his voice tight. "Open it," I said. "Please, start with the summary page." My mother opened hers first, her brow furrowed in puzzlement. She read the first bullet point. Her eyes widened slightly. She read the second, and her hand went to her throat. My father opened his, and his face, which had been so full of jovial pride moments before, seemed to crumble. He looked at the printout of the loan statement, then at Serafina, then at me, his expression one of dawning, catastrophic horror. Serafina didn't even open her folder. She just stared at me, her eyes filling with a furious, hateful fire. The plan was in motion. The stage was set. And the truth, in all its brutal, documented glory, was about to be served. Chapter 6, The Truth is Served. The silence that followed the opening of the folders was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth out of the room. The scent of chocolate cake and roasted lamb suddenly seemed grotesque, the backdrop to an autopsy. My father was the first to speak, but the words came out as a choked whisper. He wasn't looking at me, he was staring at Serafina. "Sira, what is this pinnacle? This is a joke, right? Maya, this is some kind of horrible, cruel joke." "It's not a joke, Dad," I said, my voice level. Look at the second page. It's the statement from last month. And the third page is from the month before that. The transfers match the dates of her trips almost exactly. My mother was frantically flipping through the pages, her carefully constructed composure shattering like porcelain. I don't understand, she kept muttering. The Atherton Foundation? Sierra, you said. You told us it was a grant. She looked up at Serafina, her face a mask of desperate confusion. Tell her, darling. Tell your sister she's made a mistake. Serafina just sat there, frozen, her hands clenched into fists on the table. Her perfect mask was gone. In its place was the face of a cornered animal. Her eyes darted between our parents, then landed on me with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. You went through my things, she finally spat, her voice low and venomous. You went through Dad's office, you hacked my accounts. What kind of sick, jealous monster are you? It was the classic defense. Attack the method, not the message. Make the whistleblower the criminal. But I was ready for it. I didn't hack anything, Sierra, I said calmly. Your life is an open book, you made sure of that. The rest of it, it's called a paper trail. You of all people should know that when you spend $250,000, it leaves a mark. This isn't about how I found out. It's about what I found. I turned to my father. Dad, did you know she was telling people this money was a grant? Did you know she was using the equity from your house to fly business class to Bali for a vacation while telling everyone she was working? My father flinched as if I'd slapped him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't answer because we all knew the truth. He was complicit. He had enabled the lie, co-signing the loan and the narrative that went with it. His silence was a confession. That's when my mother broke. Arthur, she said, her voice trembling, you knew about this, you took money out of our house, and you didn't tell me. Diana, he began, his voice pleading. I was helping her. It was an investment in her future. An investment? I interjected, my voice sharper than I intended. Look at page 12, Mom. It's the annual report filing from the state. Her company is delinquent. It has no assets, no declared income, and is about to be shut down. This wasn't an investment. You've been funding a very expensive and very public fantasy. Each word was a hammer blow. I watched the realization dawn on my mother's face, the slow, agonizing process of her entire world being dismantled before her eyes. The perfect daughter, the self-made genius, the family's crowning achievement, was a fraud. A fraud propped up by a secret her own husband had kept from her. Serafina finally snapped. She pushed her chair back violently, the legs scraping horribly against the hardwood floor. She stood up, her whole body trembling with rage. You hate me, she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. You have always hated me. You couldn't stand that I was successful, that I was doing something with my life while you were rotting away with your dusty old books. You couldn't build anything for yourself, so you had to tear down what I built. What did you build, Sierra? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. What did you actually build? A website? An Instagram feed? A mountain of debt for Mom and Dad to deal with when they're supposed to be retiring? You didn't build anything. You just decorated a stage. Tears were streaming due. In her face now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of pure fury. I did it for them, she screamed, gesturing wildly at our parents. I did it for this family. All anyone in this house has ever cared about is appearances. Looking perfect, being the best. I was giving them what they wanted. You think they would have been proud of me if I told them I was failing, if I told them I was scared and my ideas weren't working. She turned to our mother. You want perfect, Mom. This is what it costs. This is the price of your perfect daughter. And then came the meltdown. It was spectacular, a full-scale theatrical collapse. She swept her arm across the table, sending her plate, her wine glass, and a slice of chocolate cake crashing to the floor. She wasn't just crying anymore. She was sobbing, great, gasping, hysterical sobs that racked her entire body. I wish I were you, she screamed at me, her words mangled by her sobs. I wish I could just be quiet and invisible and have no one expect anything from me. You have no idea what it's like. The pressure. Always having to be brilliant, always having to be better. It's too much. She sank to the floor, a heap of red silk and messy tears, amidst the debris of our ruined celebration. My mother was frozen in her chair, staring at the empty space where her perfect daughter had been. My father had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Aunt Genevieve, who had been silent through the whole thing, finally spoke. She looked at me, then at the sobbing figure of my sister on the floor, and then at my shell-shocked parents. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of judicial authority. "Well," she said, placing her napkin neatly on the table, "it seems the truth has finally been served." The silence that followed was broken only by Serafina's desperate, ugly crying. I looked at the wreckage around me, the shattered glass, the ruined cake, the broken people. I had done this. I had brought the truth, and the truth had detonated. I had exposed the lies, but I had also exposed the raw, desperate pain beneath them. I had wanted justice, but what I had achieved felt more like annihilation. Chapter 7: The Monster They Made. The immediate aftermath of the dinner was a blur of chaotic motion and sharp, ugly words. Aunt Genevieve, a rock of pragmatism in a sea of emotional wreckage, took charge. She helped a catatonic Serafina up from the floor and guided her into the living room. She spoke to my father in a low, firm voice, advising him to call his bank first thing in the morning. She tried to speak to my mother, but Diana just sat at the table, staring into the middle distance, completely unresponsive. I was the enemy, a foreign agent who had breached the compound and poisoned the water supply. My father wouldn't look at me. When I tried to approach him, he just shook his head and turned away, his expression a mixture of shame and profound resentment. It was easier for him to be angry at me for exposing the wound than to be angry at himself for helping to inflict it. I gathered my things, leaving my own untouched folder on the table. As I walked to the door, my mother finally spoke, her voice flat and dead. "I hope you're happy, Maya," she said, without turning to look at me. "You finally did it. You finally destroyed your sister." Her words were meant to be a final, devastating blow, but I felt a strange sense of numbness. It wasn't about destroying my sister. It was about saving my parents. It was about choosing a painful truth over a comfortable but ultimately catastrophic lie. They couldn't see that yet. Maybe they never would. I left their house and drove home, the silence in my car a welcome relief. Over the next few days, the fallout came in waves. My father left me a single, clipped voicemail. He and my mother were handling things. Serafina's financial support was being cut off. He asked me not to contact them for a while, telling me they needed time to process this betrayal. He meant my betrayal, of course, not the actual betrayal that had put their home and future at risk. Serafina, predictably, vanished from the internet. Her Instagram account was deactivated. The Aura Wellness website went offline. She had evaporated from the digital world as quickly as she had appeared. I found out from Aunt Genevieve that she had moved out of her expensive apartment and was staying with a friend, refusing to speak to anyone in the family. The only person who spoke to me was Genevieve. She called me 2 days later. "You did the right thing, Maya," she said, her voice firm. "It was brutal, and it was ugly, and it was absolutely necessary. You were the only one strong enough to do it." "They hate me," I said, the words feeling hollow. "Mom thinks I'm a monster, and Dad thinks I'm a traitor." "Give it time," she advised. "Right now, you're the face of their pain. You're the one who switched on the lights in a room they were happy to keep people's eyes need time to adjust to the glare of the truth. Some, of course, never do." Her words were a comfort, but the silence from my family was deafening. I was ostracized, the black sheep, the demolition expert who had taken a wrecking ball to the family's carefully constructed facade. The label my sister had thrown at me during her meltdown, monster, began to echo in my mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe there was a gentler way I could have handled it, a less public, less humiliating path. But as the weeks turned into a month, my conviction returned. I had acted with the only tool I had, the truth. My family had spent decades prioritizing stories over facts, appearances over reality. I had simply held up a mirror. It wasn't my fault that they didn't like the reflection. About 2 months after the dinner, my father called me. His voice was different. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "I've been going through the finances," he said without preamble. "It was worse than you showed us. She'd taken out credit cards in my name. The debt is significant." He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "We're selling the house. We can't afford to keep it." The news hit me harder than I expected. The house was the central stage of our family's entire history, but it was also the primary collateral for the lie. Its sale felt like a necessary finality. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, and I meant it. "Don't be," he said gruffly. "You were right. I was a fool. I was so caught up in wanting her to be this incredible success story. I didn't do my job as a father or as a financial advisor." It was the closest I would ever get to an apology, and I accepted it. He told me my mother had started seeing a therapist again. She was talking about her breakdown from years ago, things she had never discussed with him. The destruction of the fantasy world had forced her to finally confront her real one. And Serafina? She had gotten a real job, as an administrative assistant at an insurance company. She was paying my father a small amount each month, a token against the mountain of debt she had created. It would take her a lifetime to pay it back. I still haven't seen them. The raw wound of that night is still healing, and I know it will leave a permanent scar. My relationship with my parents and my sister may never be what it once was, but then again, what it once was wasn't real. It was a performance, and I was the one who finally rang the curtain down.